Hello, I'm Wayne Visser and I'm Director of CSR International, and I'm here today with David Oser in Chicago, who was until recently Executive Vice President and Chief Investment Officer and Treasurer of the Shorebank here in Chicago for 34 years working for the bank. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much.
Perhaps you could just tell us what some of the principles were that Shorebank came to embody and the practices that have been inspiration for many banks around the world.
Well, Shorebank was the first and became the largest community development bank in the United States, and it really kicked off the whole idea of financial institutions being for the purpose more than just making a profit, but really focusing on their communities and trying to revitalize communities that were disinvested in. We also had added a conservation focus in the 1990s and became a triple bottom line company. But the real, I think, underlying that was from the very beginning and throughout our history is that we were more than just a bank. We had many different companies, nonprofits working in different parts of the United States, an international consulting firm, international investment companies as well, and really tried to become a model for what a financial institution could do, starting from a very small position, a very small kind of one corner in one neighborhood on the south side of Chicago.
And that was one of the unique things, is that it was so locally focused. It really was embedded in the community.
Yeah, I mean, when you've used the expression locality, and I think that's a perfect way of describing Shorebank. We were focused on very specific places, but the model that we were trying to show was that others could do similar things in their places, and if lots of people did lots of things in lots of places, you'd have a global change.
Now, Shorebank was recently closed as a result of the recession, but I know that the way that you see it is that it lives on in many other ways, and there are many other banks that have copied or been inspired by it.
It has lived on in various different ways. As I mentioned, we have a number of different companies that are, and many of them will continue in operations. They will have different names, but they will have the same purposes and be run by the same people. But we also have a lot of alumni. We have a saying, once a Shorebanker, always a Shorebanker, because we had a very special culture that really came down from the top. Our founders, two of whom are still alive, and I imagine many people in your audience will know the names Ron Brzezinski and Mary Houghton. They were able to pass on their integrity, their kindness, and their sense of mission to everybody who worked in Shorebank. And over the last 37 years, that's a lot of people. So former Shorebankers are spread in development activities around the world. So there's a real legacy there. And of course, the legacy of all the people who benefited from what Shorebank did. People who, whether it was locally, who were able to buy homes or live in apartment buildings that were renovated, or people who were benefited from microfinance activities all around the world, and will continue to do so.
Let's talk a little bit more generally about banking and the role of banking in sustainability, in development, in sort of social responsibility. And I'm glad you mentioned culture, because in many people's perception, the culture of so many banks seems to be something very different. It seems to be, perhaps one might even say, greed-based. So what can we learn from banks that are not of that type?
Everything has to come from the top. The people who are at the top of the organization, the CEO, the board of directors, have to inculcate the mission that goes beyond mere profitability. It's very, very hard to have a for-profit organization that keeps on mission for a long period of time, and in our case, throughout its entire history. And it absolutely is impossible unless it's comes right from the top and goes down through the whole organization. If the person or people at the top say all we care about is money, you can have the most altruistic person in the loan department or any other department, and they're not going to do that. They're not going to practice that altruism at work. They're going to do it through some other outside activities.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that this is something to do with the version of capitalism that we've seen practiced over the last decades, especially here? This idea of shareholder-driven capitalism and the short-termism of the market. Is this really one of the problems that we face?
I don't know if I would say it's exactly a problem. I mean, I think greed is something that is inbred in our DNA that goes back 195,000 years to the savannas of Africa. I mean, people are greedy, and it was a mechanism to help us survive. So it's not something that just sort of came out of recent developments. I think the short-term focus has come out of recent developments and is market-driven, and it's very difficult for any company, any public company, to avoid that. We avoided it because we were a private company, but that also was a hindrance. If you're a private company, it's very difficult to generate enough capital. I mean, that's why companies go public, right? To get additional capital. And for a private company, it's very difficult. We tried to grow as much as we possibly could because we wanted to impact as wide an area as we could do it. And one can argue, and there's truth in it, that our emphasis on growth was overdone.
Okay. Now I know that in your role, and because of the inspiration you've brought, you've traveled to many places.
Yes.
And seen many innovative and interesting things. Perhaps as a last question, I mean, what are some of the things that have inspired you and given you hope, especially in the work that you do?
Yeah, there are many things. I think one of the most, I'm on the board of directors of a microfinance bank in Pakistan, and that whole concept of having a special category within your banking regulations in a country of microfinance. Now, it's focused mostly on small business people, and there are various rules and regulations, and some of those rules and regulations are going to have to be tweaked because they haven't quite got it right. But the whole idea of saying there's this special category of banks that are going to focus on poorer people, poorer small business people, is a really powerful force, and one that can be and is being translated into many different countries.
Mm. Well, thanks for being with us today and sharing some of your thoughts.
I'm delighted to have had the opportunity.